Hey guys, Kevin here with the MixCoach podcast. On this episode, I got to sit in my car, after lunch one day with my good friend Van Metchke. Now, Van has been leading large volunteer groups for the last several years. For 20 years, he did it for Mariners Church and for Saddleback Church, which is Rick Warren's church. We're going to be talking about how being a volunteer leader is like being a CRO, which is the Chief Reminding Officer. You're always having to repeat things. We're going to talk about the freedom of limitations and how actually when you have confines and you are limited with resources or people, or how that can actually free you up to do things. We're going to talk about a little bit about the advantages of Planning Center, and when you use Planning Center, how that can really help you with your volunteer teams. A couple other things. He's going to talk about how when he was at Saddleback, how he tried to work his way down the ladder. You'll know more about that when we cover it. And then we're going to talk about how keeping your volunteers encouraged and how even brownies can help with that. All right. So without any further ado, let's jump in the car and talk to Van.
Yeah, that works.
That works good.
Yeah.
Okay, we're rolling. So let's talk about volunteers.
You should take your seatbelt off. You look uncomfortable.
I feel like now when I take a drink of my...
Yeah, we're not driving, so it's okay.
It's safe. I remember I did a couple of podcast episodes where I was, looking into a camera, but I was just driving along and I got more feedback from people saying, you should be careful.
I do. I was doing a lot of those. Yeah.
I think they need to come up with a mount right here, and I think I've got one at home. Just put it right there, and so you just adjust your rearview mirror if you're talking. Don't look at what's behind you or beside you. Just drive and talk.
Yeah. Well, they do have some mounts that suction cup up, whatever. So you can do that. So
let's talk about volunteers.
Okay.
Okay. So our church culture is real volunteer driven, and it's a beautiful thing in that you pull people, or people come from out of the woodwork, like some amazing volunteers that we both had the opportunity to work with, Dave and Cindy. They're just amazing. That's the upside, is that you find amazing people.
They kind of spoil you when you get volunteers like that.
Yeah. The downside is that, like for me, I love learning this new technology and stuff, and then I have to turn right around and teach it. So I never feel like I find a stride where I'm improving personally. I always have to hand it off and then kind of watch from the outside. It's kind of a pull with me because I'm a creative person and I like to learn the stuff. But our church culture, thankfully, is one of those that it's like give if a volunteer wants to and can do it, let them do it. Let them learn to do it and improve. So. The churches that you've worked at, were they like that? Were they more staff driven? Were they volunteer driven? How?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I've famously, anybody who's ever listened to me on other podcasts and stuff, or who knows me, knows that I always joke that I worked my way down.
That's good.
So I started it when I came out of the secular world of, and by secular I mean I toured, and then I toured with Christian bands, and then I went into secular integration when I worked for an integrator who also did live events. And I really worked for them because I like to do live events. The integration stuff, it was nice because I learned how to do it. And then when I came into church, the first church I worked at was Saddleback, and it was a huge church already, even back then.
Which for people watching is Rick Warren's church.
Yeah. And
Purpose Driven Life.
Yeah. And it was like the main... Yeah, it was at the main campus. They didn't have 95,000 campuses like they do now all over the world. They just had one. They just had one campus in Lake Forest.
Sneeze?
No, it's not, whatever it was. I don't know. A burp and a sneeze, whatever. So you have great outtakes on this one. You have great intro.
Outtakes.
Yeah, we don't. Yeah, what I always do. I say we do not edit.
Yeah.
But when I started there. They were like a tiny church of, 16,000 or something like that. And on one campus.
Tiny church.
Yeah. And so I was on a staff where the only volunteers were none of the key positions were volunteer. So audio, which is what I did, full-time front of house engineer, that was me. We had a full-time video director. We had a full-time lighting person. And then on the ancillary stuff, we had volunteers. So in our, what we called it the video record room, which was basically, recording the services, which got put out to all the on campus. That was a volunteer position. All the video people in the video control room, except for the director, was a volunteer, and all the camera people were volunteers, and all of our, and a lot of our technical people, like our people that would help us set the stage and do events around the campus and stuff, they were part-time people. So I came in where most of the money positions, as we would say it, like you were in the regular industry, the money positions were paid. And most of us had come from the outside. We were not church techs that came from another church. We were people that came from an industry. And so, then I went to another church, another bigger church, Mariners, which wasn't as big as Saddleback, but it was still huge. And we had less pro people, but we still had full-time audio guy, part-time lighting guy, full-time lighting guy who also did all the staging, tech director, who was really a production manager, and then a full-time video director. And then we had some part-time folks that were in charge of like kids building, youth building, all that stuff. They were staff, but they were, and then we had lots of volunteers. In fact, I spent most of my time there when I was not doing the main building, working on training volunteers. Like we had MOPS, for those of you who are in church, that's mothers of preschoolers. We had MOPS events Tuesday and Wednesday that basically was about 400 moms, 200 at each. So I didn't want to have people there for the whole thing, so I literally built manuals and trained the moms to be able to run their event. They weren't super, and when they had like a musical guest or somebody that was like super complicated, we'd still come and do the event. But 98% of the time, they had manuals that I had built that literally were manuals where it literally was like the DVD player, and I had my finger on a button within the picture. Press this button, it does this. So I really spent a lot of times training volunteers to be able to run the simple production systems. It wasn't rocket science what they were doing, and it wasn't like, Adele was in there singing. I mean, it was not to say it wasn't, important. It was, but it was, the expectations were medium, and the execution was fine. And so that's what I did. Then the next church that I went to, I was the only paid person when I got there, and everybody was a volunteer. Literally everybody was a volunteer. So I had to bring along people. I found the people. I spent my first year just finding people that I knew were going to be my leads, whether they were paid or not. There were a couple of them. There was one in particular that I said, I'm hiring this person. It's just going to take me a while. The pastors don't know yet, but we're hiring this person. It took me a year to get him on part-time and another year to get him on full-time. And but that's what I did. Everybody else was a volunteer. Everybody else was a volunteer the whole time until we started doing campuses, and then I was able to hire on part-time production managers, tech directors, whatever you want to call them, for those campuses. And as the staff would start to see those people as invaluable, that would allow me to be able to hire them. We live in a state in California where hiring people now is a lot harder, because we have some crazy laws that are happening now that are just, they're meant for good, but of course most crazy laws that are meant for good actually make it worse. But needless to say, I had I would keep people volunteers as long as I possibly could.
Okay, that's a good, my next question is this. How do you find good volunteers? How do you attract good volunteers? And how do you keep volunteers happy long term?
That is a 17-hour podcast, but, and I'm not saying I even know all the answers. The way I did it was, luckily I'm a people person. I'm like I always joke I'm in the 3% of tech people that's an extrovert.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was easy because I mean, you know me, I'll talk to anybody, but and I know most tech people are not like that. Most tech people are introverts. Mm-hmm. But the way I did it was I set an expectation of excellence of what we were going to do. I tried to keep the bar as high as was reasonably possible with what we did and the systems that we had. And good people are attracted to two things. Well, three things, actually. First of all, good people are attracted to quality. Good people are attractive to order. Mm-hmm. Like, you have to, I'm not that organized of a person in my personal life. Thank God I'm married to a woman who is, if it's not a right angle, it's the wrong angle. So she keeps me on the straight and narrow at home. But in my job, I'm very organized, and I always really was organized as a tech director. Mm-hmm. Because, you get fired if you're not organized. But people like organization. They like to know, because organization values people. If you have systems and processes, it values your volunteers, because they go, oh, they care enough to make this not a fly by the seat of your pants. Because in production, there's so many unknowns that are actually going to happen on the weekends. Yeah. And you have to try to mitigate that. I mean, being a good tech production manager, tech director, is basically just a exercise in mitigating chaos. Right? Mm-hmm. I mean, honestly, it is like herding cats, And so you have to have systems in place to where you take the vulnerability out of things, which lowers people's stress. Because you got to remember that most volunteers don't think like we do, even if they're tech people. They've got other jobs, they've got other stuff going on in their life. You don't know what just happened. They had a fight with their spouse right before they got there. Their kids are on drugs. I mean, there's 10,000 things that are happening, So you don't know what's going to happen when they get there. And so you have to have enough order to make it so that they feel like everything's going to be okay, no matter what happens. And then the other thing is the way you treat people. Like, I would never ever, it's that whole adage, John Maxwell or whoever it is, it's like, praise in public, correct in private. Mm-hmm. So if something bad happens, you fix it, but you don't make a big deal out of it. Right. And then if there's a bad behavior, you correct that in private later, appropriately, as your church probably has every church should have a method of how you correct people, and that should come from on high. And if you haven't got one, you should ask, because they should have one. But then also praise often. I would always thank my people. Hey, awesome job, you killed it today, great service, the whole shot. But not insincerely. I mean, sincerely. You got to find people know you, and they know if you're not, if you're just saying it. And that's one of the things. And then celebrate people. Like I loved celebrating people. The one church that I was at, luckily one of my volunteer video directors owned a couple of Wingstops, which is, if you don't know, if you're from someplace other than, if you're from someplace that doesn't have Wingstops, it's kind of like Buffalo Wild Wings, but it's not a sports bar. It's just like this small, eatery. Yeah. But the wings are awesome.
And they sprinkled the French fries with
crack.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's just amazing. And so he owned one. In fact, he owned two.
Yeah.
So I would say, hey, we're going to meet at so-and-so's house. We had a couple different people. You know, the Burgers were one. We had the Fitzgeralds were one. And then we had the church. We would have get-togethers. We would have all the volunteers. And at that church, we started having multiple campuses, but they were all reasonably close, you know, within, 30 miles. So I would just invite everybody, hey, come here. Here's the address. We're going to celebrate the team. We're going to celebrate accomplishments, whatever. And we would do birthdays. I would do giveaways, gift cards. And it was, $10 give. I mean, it wasn't like, we were giving away cars or something like that. It was just a little gift, and do that, and then go around the room sometime and say, hey, what's your name? We have some new people here. What's your name and how long have you been in tech ministry? What do you do? Oh, I do Pro Presenter, or I do lighting, or whatever, and what campus are you on? So I would be the kind of the ringmaster of that, but I would just make people feel at home. And then we would, of course, people like to eat. Gotta have food. Yeah. And we would have Wingstop, because they'd cater it. I mean, he wouldn't give it to me for free, but they were cool about it, so they'd give it to me at a discount. And I had it in my budget to have probably 3 of those events a year. Okay. And I would just figure it out, just how much I can spend. And then you always have a lot of, volunteers that, your key volunteers that if they find out about it, they're going to go, hey, how can I help? And sometimes if they're like good cooks, or they are really good at making brownies or something like that, you say make 200 brownies. And if they're terrible cooks, you say, great, can you just pitch in like $50?
200 brownies.
Well, I had a lot.
You had a big team.
We had a really big team at one point. Yeah, we had a pretty big, giant team.
Well, when you talk about
we had 4 campuses, so we had a lot of volunteers.
Yeah.
But that's how I did it. I mean, I was just good to people. I was just good to people. I was caring. You have to learn their love language. There's some people that want the Christian side hug. There's other people that you got to fist bump. Your one guy is named Robert. He does not like being called Bob, so never call him Bob. Right. Call him Robert. There's people that want to shake hands. There's people that don't want to be touched. There's people that so you've got to figure out your people.
Right.
And once you do, because ultimately most people want to be part of a family, no matter what ministry they go into at the church. They want to be part of a family, and they want to know that what they're doing matters to the church, and the only way they're going to know that it matters to the church is you, as the leader of that ministry, tell them. Because you're kind of their pastor, I mean, I had to fire a couple one time because they were spending too much time at church, and it was hurting their marriage.
Really?
I had to fire them. Yeah. And we revisited them in a year, and they both told me that is the best thing that ever happened. Nobody at church, they've been serving at church their whole marriage, nobody had told them to stop serving because they needed to focus on their family. And so when people realize that you love them and that you care about them, and it's more to you than just getting them to fill a seat, or, well, I got to have somebody to do that camera, so I got to have, whatever, do that. Yes, you have to do that, but you can't do that as sacrifice to the people. Right. You can't sacrifice all your volunteers at the altar of technology. You have to love them and be about them. And one of the things that makes this so good is Planning Center has made it so much easier to take care of your people.
I can imagine.
So if you guys don't know what Planning Center is, just Google it. Planning Center online. In fact, if you have a really, really small church and you can't afford it, they do actually have accounts if your church is small enough that you can get it for free. Yeah. So it's invaluable for...
So how did you use that for your volunteers then?
Well, the good part about it is as Planning Center got better and better, you use it as a device to get people to acknowledge what that they're going to be able to show up. There's no... you get people to be able to see their team. Like, this is kind of their team. Like I always tried to have 5 teams so that one team would always take a week off each month. So you'd rotate those teams around, So you'd have 4 that would be on, 1 would be off, then 4 would be on, 1 would be off, 4 would be on, 1 would be off, like that. So people could actually at least one time a month sit in church with their family, or go on vacation or something. Because we ask a lot of tech volunteers, ask a lot of them. Now most of them love it and they want it, but we still ask a lot. You have to, and sometimes they're not going to say it. You got to say it.
Right.
But the way we did Planning Center was Planning Center just became a way of, it became its own little ecosystem, and they've actually done a great job of, I call them, like Planning Center is like the Facebook of church volunteers, because they're really good at, you got a phone? Great. You got, you never have you don't have a computer. It's just, you just got your iPhone or your Android or whatever. You can still, the apps are so good, you can communicate through that. Some people like to be called. It gives you a thing where my assistant could call them and just, they wanted to call on the phone. So it gives you all that ability, and that way they really feel cared for because they're on the schedule. They get to see who else is on the team with them. They know what they're walking into. And if they have a problem and they can't do it on the app, they could do a shout out to everybody that does that position and go, hey, I was scheduled for this week, but I can't do it because my mom died or whatever. And then other people are going to always, I've never had a problem with people not jumping in. I can jump in that week.
So they can communicate on Planning Center even during the week when they're...
Yeah.
I never tried that. That's good.
So people get, if you set it up right, people can see that, like they say, hey, I can't do it. So other people in that community can say, oh, well, I can operate. I'm operating ProPresenter. I can operate ProPresenter. Oh, I need, something happened. I can jump in and do that. Or at least if you don't have it set up that way, you can at least do an all call as the production manager.
I do it with the text,
and say, hey, everybody, so-and-so had something, happen. And, the other good thing is when they would say, I can't be here because this happened, that gave us an opportunity to have a prayer list.
Right.
And the last church I was at, my assistant, she was awesome at making sure that we had a list. And it was just me and her. She wasn't even full time. She did all the Planning Center, she did all the ProPresenter, and she was my video director on the weekends, except that she started training other video directors so she could have some time off. But she was only my part-time assistant, and she just wrangled this stuff. She just rocked it. But I always knew everybody, anything that was happening with people, at the one church where we had multiple campuses, I got to a place where I didn't even know all the volunteers really, but I had key people in all those. Some were volunteer, some were staff, and then they took care of them because they'd been with me long enough that I had developed this is what I expect, this is the standard, this is how you treat people. But that's just, like the Bible says, line upon line, precept upon precept. It's just, you got to do it over and over and over and over again, and eventually everybody gets it. And when new people come in, they don't know any different. You spend your first year at a lot of churches. Probably a lot of people who are listening to this have come from one church and come to another church. I came to churches where the person that was in front of me sometimes had not done what the pastors wanted, and I spent the first year of the church being at the church where people would go, well, that's not how we did it. I said, well, you know what? I don't know how we used to do it, but this is how we're doing it now. And you just got to keep. One of the churches I was at, the junior high pastor, he always told me, he said, you preach the gospel of technology. He goes, you just tell us, this is how we're going to do it. This is the standard. This is what is expected. And every time I talk to you about it, you go, well, this is how we're going to do it. And so when you do that, you respect people, because that being organized, having a system, that respects people. It respects people because you're saying, I care enough to have thought about this, and now I'm imparting it to you.
And I think people, I know I do, I take great comfort in knowing what my limitations are. Like, for instance, I told a friend the other day, there's 5 right ways to do this. We just got to pick one and stay on it. So this is the way we're going to do it. Doesn't necessarily mean this is the only way to do it. It's like this is the way we're going to do it for now. Subject to change without notice. But,
absolutely.
And also, one of the things that I did when we started doing video was like our camera 1 and camera 2, which is at front of house. Everybody was just grabbing shots wherever they could. And I learned this from Flatirons from Rob McTavish, who's a video genius.
Yep, he is.
He had, camera 1, these are your 2 shots. Camera 2, here's your 2 shots. You're going to get this shot and this shot. And if you go between those 2 shots, you won. One of the things that we just came up with at our church was a win sheet. We win when we do this. So I think setting those boundaries, not that they are the end all be all, but it's boundaries. It's like if you play within this box, whatever you do in the box is good, and we all win.
Well, because you lower people's anxiety when you do that,
right?
Because they know what you expect. People like to know what's expected of them.
I do personally. I like to know what's expected of me so that I can exceed expectations a little bit. If I don't know what the expectations are, I'll burn myself out trying to. Yeah,
well, you can't hit it. You waste a lot of ammo trying to hit a target you don't know where and when you don't know where it is.
Yeah,
you know, and so that's dumb. People get tired of that. People are just like, well, this is stupid. I don't even know what we're trying to accomplish. You know, you have to set your goals, and you have to repeat them over and over and over again. You have to constantly, because once you're sick, I remember I used to say, man, if we do this song again, I swear I'm going to kill myself. You know, and a music pastor I worked for said to me, he goes, you know what, fair enough, but you got to remember that when we're all completely sick of this song, most of the congregation is just getting it.
Just now learning it.
Yeah. He said, so you just gotta suck it up and be okay with that. So in tech, it's the same way. You may say, well, I've told these guys like 500 times. It doesn't matter. You just keep doing it.
A friend of mine, Michael Rafter, who's one of my great volunteers, sent me an article that talked about how being in leadership is really about being the CRO, the Chief Reminding Officer, which is something I have to get because I'm like, I've told them that 3 times already. Do I need to tell them again? Well, yeah, that's my job, is just to keep reminding them that this is the way we're going to do this now.
It's a lot like raising kids.
Yeah.
You know, your kids are like, I have told that girl 50,000 times, blah, 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 whatever it is. My wife and I just had a conversation about that the other day, and I'm like, well, it's your job. You know, your job is to be 50,001 times. That's just how it goes. You know, even when they become adults, you still tell them. You still have to tell them stuff. So, no, that's, so I will tell you this, just to sum up, I love being in charge of volunteers. Volunteers are, and they always were, in the 20 years that I was in full-time ministry, volunteers were my greatest joy. Always my greatest joy. I loved being the leader of volunteers and just watching them grow, watching them experience God in the church, just watching them feel like they fit. There's a lot of people that, maybe you don't know this, but technical people are weird. It's true. And I'm one of them. I'm a weirdo. But it's so cool when you have a bunch of weirdos in tech ministry and they all feel like, this is my calling. This is what I was meant to do. And they feel like they're serving and they've gotten into their groove and their niche. It's the best.
I've got some great, in closing, this will be the last thing, but I've got some great volunteers at church. And I know one of the best feelings that I have is when I say, you would be really good at this, and then train them, and then they are really good at it, and they don't realize how good they are. To me, my eyes start to leak a little bit because that is a great feeling. I've got camera operators who exceeded every expectation I had, and I think their own too. Video directors, audio people. I mean, it's a great feeling. So,
well, one of the greatest gifts is, and I see this in other people in my personal life. A key quality that as a tech leader you have to develop is seeing people for what they can be, not what they are at the moment. Like looking at and just going, they've got it. I mean, you're not going to find that many of those where you just go, wow, that person can be awesome. You have all these different levels of people in your tech ministry, which we could talk about for hours. But the coolest one is when you find those diamonds in the rough and you just go, this person has no idea how awesome they are going to be in this. And I'm going to pour into them that person and make and just see how far we can go with this. And that's the best. It's the best thing. Yeah.